At this very moment, a profound and heavy tension blankets the Western Pacific. A quiet that is entirely deceptive, for the southern islands of Japan are currently operating under immense nationwide alerts as they brace for the inevitable. Across the dark waters of the East China Sea, a similar solemn preparation is underway, with the island also placed under severe sweeping alerts as the shadow of this atmospheric leviathan falls across its shores. Super Typhoon Bavi, a colossal and unforgiving engine of destruction, is poised to strike at any given moment, bringing with it an apocalyptic trinity of massive, tree-shearing winds, towering and relentless storm surges, and a deluge of torrential rain that threatens to drown the lowlands and wash away the coastlines. As millions of people look out at the darkening horizon, watching the clouds bruise and the ocean swell with a terrifying rhythmic power, they are forced to confront a deeply humbling reality about our place in the natural order. In our modern arrogance, we have paved over the natural wetlands, altered the flow of ancient rivers, and built our towering monuments of human pride directly in the path of the sea, forgetting that we are merely temporary guests on this earth. Now, as the barometric pressure plummets and the first heavy wind-driven drops begin to lash against the glass, many are looking upward and whispering that this impending cataclysm is not merely a shift in the weather, but literally God's punishment for our profound spiritual and environmental hubris. We have mistaken our technological advancements for absolute dominion over the natural world, and now the Creator is reminding us of our ultimate vulnerability. As the massive winds begin to howl and the storm surges rise to reclaim the land we stole from the ocean, we are about to witness a stark, terrifying demonstration of divine judgment. A powerful reminder that when the heavens decide to correct our course, no concrete wall, no steel barrier, and no human invention can stand in the way of the storm. The ocean does not negotiate, it does not pause for our carefully constructed schedules, and it certainly does not respect the imaginary boundaries we draw upon our maps. Was this miraculous survival a triumph of human preparation and community solidarity, or was it a moment of profound divine mercy, a temporary stay of execution in a world that seems increasingly out of balance? And more importantly, as Bavi continues to churn westward across the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, growing in physical size, if not in peak intensity, are we witnessing a warning that we have collectively chosen to ignore? What happens next when this colossal engine of destruction sets its sights on the densely populated mainlands of Asia? To truly understand the magnitude of what has already happened, and to anticipate the profound challenges that are about to unfold, we must first step back from the immediate, chaotic present and look deeply into the broader historical context of the Pacific typhoon season. For generations, the communities scattered across the western North Pacific have lived in a delicate, often dangerous dance with the atmosphere, relying on the seasonal rhythms that dictated when the great storms would arrive and when the skies would clear. Historically, the absolute peak of this typhoon season, the period when the ocean temperatures are at their warmest and the atmospheric conditions are most favorable for explosive cyclogenesis, arrives in the late summer months of August and September. But the year 2026 has violently rewritten this established calendar, presenting us with a statistical anomaly that has left both seasoned climate scientists and thoughtful theologians searching for deeper explanations. Super Typhoon Bavi is not an isolated incident of bad weather. It is the third Category 5 super typhoon of this highly active Pacific season, following closely on the heels of earlier monsters like Sinkalu. This accelerated timeline of hyperactivity forces us to ask ourselves, are we repeating history, or are we charting a darker, more volatile course into uncharted territory? For the mature observer watching these monumental events unfold from the quiet comfort of a living room thousands of miles away, it is remarkably easy to feel detached from the physical reality of the destruction. But the sobering reality is that the sheer thermodynamic energy released by a storm of Bavi's magnitude is equivalent to the detonation of thousands of nuclear weapons. When such incomprehensible forces are unleashed upon the earth, many people, regardless of their specific religious denomination or philosophical background, find themselves asking whether humanity has fundamentally overstepped its bounds. Have we mistakenly equated our rapid technological advancements with absolute control over the natural world, forgetting that we are merely temporary guests in a house that the Creator is continually sustaining and occasionally reclaiming? The chronological development of Super Typhoon Bavi reads like a masterclass in atmospheric violence, a terrifying demonstration of how quickly a benign tropical disturbance can evolve into a force of apocalyptic proportions. It began quietly on the 2nd of July, as a modest tropical depression forming in the vast warm waters of the western North Pacific, barely registering a whisper of the chaos it was destined to unleash. But by the afternoon of the 3rd, as it drifted over waters boasting extremely high ocean heat content and shielded from the disruptive forces of vertical wind shear, Bavi underwent a period of explosive, rapid intensification, its winds climbing past 105 miles per hour with alarming speed. By the evening of the 4th, it had been officially upgraded to super typhoon status, prompting urgent and dire warnings to be issued for the vulnerable islands of Guam and Rota. The atmosphere was priming itself for a catastrophic event, and on the 5th, it reached the ultimate classification of a Category 5 super typhoon, beginning to threaten Guam with the promise of truly catastrophic conditions. The climax of this violent development arrived in the early dark hours of the 6th of July, when Bavi recorded its peak intensity, boasting maximum sustained winds of 180 miles per hour, with gusts that likely exceeded 220 miles per hour. At approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, the massive swirling eye of the storm made a direct, unflinching landfall on the small island of Rota, subjecting its 2,000 residents to the full, unmitigated fury of the eye wall. As the storm center eventually exited and moved past Guam, the sheer scale of the physical devastation became apparent, with extensive damage reported throughout the capital of Hagåtña, particularly around the historic Paseo area. While the storm dumped between 8 and 12 inches of torrential rain, triggering widespread flash flooding across the island. As we observe this relentless progression of power, we must pause to consider our place in the natural order. Many wondered whether humanity had become entirely disconnected from nature, building our concrete structures with an arrogance that blinds us to the raw, untamed power of the elements. Are we building communities in places nature repeatedly tries to reclaim? And what lessons are we stubbornly refusing to learn from the relentless pounding of the wind and the sea? Amidst the overwhelming narrative of physical destruction and meteorological fury, it is the deeply human stories of survival, loss, and resilience that truly anchor this event in our collective consciousness, reminding us that behind every statistic is a beating heart and a fragile life. On the island of Rota, known affectionately and rightfully as the Friendly Island, the immediate aftermath of the storm was characterized by a profound and total isolation, as the entire community of 2,000 souls was left entirely without power, running water, or reliable communications. The first drone footage to breach the cloud cover revealed a heartbreaking trail of complete debris, showing a landscape stripped of its lush tropical vegetation and reduced to a monochromatic palette of brown and gray, sparking an immediate and emotional outpouring of support from the global Chamorro and Pacific Islander diaspora. Yet, woven into this tapestry of absolute devastation is the astonishing, almost unbelievable miracle of zero casualties. Despite the fact that 180-mile-per-hour winds physically flattened structures and turned everyday objects into deadly projectiles, strict evacuation protocols, unwavering shelter-in-place orders, and a deep cultural adherence to community safety resulted in not a single typhoon-associated injury or death across both Rota and Guam. This miraculous outcome is a massive point of emotional relief amidst the overwhelming destruction, but it also invites deep spiritual reflection. Some survivors describe the event in profoundly spiritual terms, speaking of a protective divine presence that held the walls of their homes together when the laws of physics suggested they should have inevitably collapsed. Others viewed the survival through the lens of human resilience and the power of communal preparation. But regardless of the interpretation, the absence of loss of life feels like a profound grace. In the capital of Hagonia, residents shared tearful videos of the heavily damaged Paseo area, a major cultural, historical, and recreational hub that has stood for generations, now unrecognizable and buried under mud and debris, representing not just an economic loss, but a deep cultural wound. As we witness these emotional incidents and the dramatic, real-life moments of communities coming together in the dark, we are reminded of our profound human vulnerability. Some viewed the event through faith, while others viewed it through science. But regardless of belief, the questions raised by the disaster remain difficult to ignore. Have we mistaken technology for control, believing that our reinforced concrete and advanced warning systems can entirely shield us from the wrath of the heavens? To fully comprehend the threat that Super Typhoon Bavi currently poses as it traverses the Philippine Sea, we must delve into the complex scientific and meteorological explanations that govern its behavior, moving beyond the simple numbers to understand the deep atmospheric mechanics at play. Bavi underwent its explosive intensification over the western North Pacific due to a perfect, albeit dangerous, alignment of extremely high ocean heat content and a complete lack of vertical wind shear, allowing the storm to efficiently convert the thermal energy of the warm waters into the kinetic energy of 180 mile per hour winds. However, as the storm has moved westward toward Taiwan and China, it has begun to encounter slightly cooler sea surface temperatures and increased wind shear, causing its peak maximum sustained winds to weaken to around 127 miles per hour. To the casual observer, this weakening trend might sound like a comforting piece of news. But this is a dangerous and potentially fatal misconception that masks a much more insidious threat. The crucial scientific detail that is often overlooked in mainstream reporting is the weakening paradox, wherein the peak wind speed drops, but the storm's physical size, specifically its gale force wind field, rapidly expands. This means that Bavi is no longer a compact, concentrated bullet of destruction. It has become a massive, sprawling system that will affect a vastly larger geographic area, causing widespread, prolonged damage, rather than just a localized, pinpoint eyewall hit. Furthermore, as this massive moisture tap approaches the steep mountainous terrain of northern and central Taiwan, it will interact with the topography in a process known as orographic lift, forcing the moist air upward, cooling it, and triggering extreme, concentrated rainfall rates that create a catastrophic risk for flash flooding and deep-seated landslides. As we analyze these intricate meteorological patterns, we are forced to confront the limitations of our scientific understanding and our ability to predict the sheer volatility of the atmosphere. It is in these moments of profound physical vulnerability when we realize that our most advanced supercomputers can only approximate the chaos of nature that many are compelled to state that these disasters are literally God's punishment for our collective hubris. A reminder that the atmosphere operates on a scale of time and energy that dwarfs human comprehension and control. The unprecedented behavior of Super Typhoon Bavi cannot be fully understood without placing it within the broader context of global climate and environmental change, a narrative of a planet undergoing rapid and profound physical transformations. The western North Pacific is currently experiencing a hyperactive season characterized by rapid intensification events that are occurring earlier and further north than historical norms, a direct and measurable consequence of warming oceans and altered atmospheric circulation patterns. The ocean heat content that fueled Bavi's explosive growth is not an anomaly. It is the new baseline, a thermal reservoir of excess energy trapped in the marine environment due to decades of greenhouse gas emissions and industrial expansion. But the physical changes to our environment extend far beyond the warming of the seas. They are also visible in the disappearing wetlands, the rapid coastal development, and the systematic paving over of natural buffers that once protected our shorelines from the encroaching tide. We have engineered our coastlines for maximum economic efficiency, building sprawling urban centers and fragile infrastructure in the direct path of the storm surge, fundamentally altering the hydrological landscape, and removing the Earth's natural sponges. This relentless expansion into vulnerable zones, driven by human pride and economic ambition, has created a landscape that is highly susceptible to catastrophic flooding, as the water, having nowhere natural to go, is forced into our streets, our homes, and our lives. As we observe the shifting baseline of the typhoon season, with storms maintaining super typhoon status further north than usual before interacting with land, we must ask ourselves if we are repeating history by ignoring the clear environmental warning signs that are appearing all around us. The disappearing wetlands and the warming oceans are not just abstract scientific concepts. They are the physical manifestations of a disrupted balance, leading many to reflect on our moral and environmental responsibility. Others saw the disaster as a warning about responsibility and stewardship, questioning whether we have the right to alter the fundamental chemistry of the atmosphere, and then act surprised when the resulting storms become more violent and destructive. Are we building communities in places nature repeatedly tries to reclaim? And what lessons are we refusing to learn from the rising tides and the intensifying winds? In the quiet, reflected hours following the passage of such a monumental storm, the mind naturally turns from the physical mechanics of the atmosphere to the deeper spiritual and philosophical implications of our existence on this fragile planet. When we observe the sheer, unbridled destruction left in the wake of a Category 5 super typhoon, the flattening of entire islands, and the flooding of ancient cities, many faithful observers and theologians are compelled to state that these disasters are literally God's punishment for our collective arrogance and moral failings. This is not a perspective born of mere superstition, but a profound theological reflection on the concept of stewardship, suggesting that the earth is a sacred trust that we have squandered through our relentless consumption, our disregard for the natural world, and our worship of material progress over spiritual humility. The biblical narratives of the flood and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah have long served as cultural touchstones for understanding divine judgment. And in the face of Bavi's devastating power, it is difficult for the contemplative mind not to draw parallels between the ancient warnings and our modern reality. We have treated the natural world as an infinite resource to be exploited, rather than a delicate, interconnected web of life that requires our reverence and protection. And now, the natural world is responding with a force that demands our immediate and total humility. Some view the event through faith, while others view it through science, but regardless of belief, the questions raised by the disaster remain difficult to ignore, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our technological prowess cannot shield us from the ultimate consequences of our actions. When we look at the devastation of Rota and the impending threat to mainland Asia, we must respectfully explore how people interpreted the event through faith, spirituality, morality, stewardship, responsibility, humility, and human vulnerability. Have we become so enamored with our own creations that we have forgotten the Creator? And in doing so, have we invited these calamities upon ourselves? The repeated assertion that disasters are literally God's punishment serves not as a message of despair, but as an urgent call to repentance, a demand that we realign our lives with the natural order, practice true environmental stewardship, and approach the majesty of the natural world with the deep, abiding humility it so richly deserves. As we look toward the immediate future, the forecasting models and meteorological analyses paint a deeply concerning picture of the risks that lie ahead for the densely populated regions of East Asia, highlighting a future where the boundaries of traditional typhoon impacts are constantly being redrawn. Super Typhoon Bavi, though slightly weakened in peak intensity, remains a massive and incredibly dangerous system, currently tracking west-northwest across the Philippine Sea with a vast circulation that threatens to engulf millions of people in its expanding wind field. The forecast for the coming days indicates that the storm will first pass near or over Japan's southern Sakishima Islands, including Ishigakijima, on Friday, bringing strong winds, heavy rain, and treacherous seas to a region that is already highly sensitive to tropical cyclones. Following this, Bavi will brush close to northern and central Taiwan on Saturday, where the aforementioned orographic lift will trigger extreme rainfall, threatening catastrophic flash flooding and deep-seated landslides in the mountainous terrain. Finally, the storm is expected to make landfall in eastern China, likely in the Fujian or Zhejiang provinces near Fuzhou or south of Shanghai, between the 11th and 12th of July. The most alarming aspect of this forecast, the part that nobody is talking about with sufficient urgency, is the shifting baseline of typhoon tracks and intensities. Storms are now maintaining super typhoon status further north than usual before interacting with land, increasing the risk to highly populated mid-latitude zones like eastern China and Japan that are less psychologically and infrastructurally prepared for Category 5 equivalent forces. The vulnerability of these densely populated mainland areas to these expanding, prolonged wind fields represents a massive future risk, as the storm surge in the shallow waters of the East China Sea threatens to breach extensive seawalls and inundate low-lying coastal cities. Are the warning signs appearing again, not just in the intensity of the wind, but in the geographical reach of the destruction? As we forecast the path of this behemoth, we must recognize that the future risk is not just about the weather. It is about the collision of an increasingly volatile atmosphere with a human population that continues to concentrate in the most vulnerable coastal zones. As the clock ticks down to the anticipated landfall in eastern China, the atmosphere across the region is thick with a palpable sense of anticipation and dread, a collective holding of breath as millions of people prepare for the inevitable impact of Super Typhoon Bavi. What happens next will be determined not just by the meteorological whims of the storm, but by the preparedness, resilience, and sheer luck of the communities in its path. In Japan, meteorologists and storm chasers are providing live, tense updates from the Ryukyu Islands, documenting the approaching threat and creating a somber atmosphere as communities watch the massive storm swell on their radar screens. In Taiwan, families are boarding up windows, stocking up on essential supplies, and moving to higher ground, acutely aware of the deadly threat posed by the mountainous terrain and the potential for catastrophic landslides. In China, authorities are mobilizing massive evacuation efforts, preparing for the worst as the storm surge threatens to overwhelm the extensive coastal defenses near highly populated areas like Shanghai and Fuzhou. The waiting is often the most difficult part, a psychological crucible where the mind races through every possible scenario, from the storm veering away at the last moment to the seawalls failing and the waters rushing in. Will Bavi undergo re-intensification over the warm Kuroshio current before hitting the coast, regaining some of its lost ferocity? Whether one views these events through the lens of faith, seeing them as a literal divine judgment, or through the lens of science, recognizing them as the physical consequences of our environmental degradation, the mandate remains the same. We must change, we must adapt, and we must learn to live in harmony with the forces that govern our planet. The storm will eventually pass, the winds will die down, and the sun will rise once again over the battered landscapes of the Pacific and the flooded shores of East Asia. But the true test of our character will not be found in how quickly we can rebuild our concrete structures, but in how deeply we can reflect on the reasons the storms have become so fierce. As we look out into the dark, uncertain future, watching the radar sweep across the warming oceans, we are left with only one lingering, inescapable question. Have we truly learned the lessons of the past?